Okay, Leonette, it is now 6 p.m.
Thank you all, and welcome to the first League of Women Voters of Greater Birmingham program for 2021, and quite the beginning of the year it has been so far. If you have not already seen, I would direct your attention to the LWVUS and LWVAL press releases on the anti-democratic mob that breached the Capitol last Wednesday. They're both very hard-hitting, and for the Alabama League press release, it was immediately picked up by media and retweeted, so it is getting some traction there. The second announcement I'd like to make on the good news front is that recently our local league has received a very substantial Ed Fund grant from the state league, courtesy of the CARES Act, because we had to invest in a number of new materials to meet CDC guidelines for voter outreach and voter education. So that was a big win, and thank you to the State League for that. Third is that we started our first ever Giving Tuesday campaign in December of 2020. It was an overwhelming success, and we have way over 4 figures that have been donated to the League Ed Fund for us to gear up for local elections this spring and then statewide elections next year. So there were many who were not members of League, they're friends of League members, and the board and League members all ponied up. And so this is a great beginning of a tradition, I would hope. The next announcement, one more chance to pay your dues for 2021. And we're going to call it quits here in a couple of weeks because the National League will update our membership rolls. If you have some questions, if you can't remember whether you did it or not, then contact Leslie offline and she will get you straight. With that, I am going to turn over the program to our tireless Vice President, Dana Ellis, so she can introduce our speakers and talk a little bit about the program. Thank you, Dana.
Good evening, everybody. It is good to have the first meeting of 2021, and tonight, actually this meeting and next month's meeting will focus on the environment and climate, which is exciting to me that we'll have two back-to-back sessions. Before I forget, I'll tell you that the February meeting will be on February the 11th, also at 6 p.m. and we'll have panelists discussing local environmental issues. More to follow on that. I'm going to introduce both our speakers today, and then I'm going to be quiet for the rest of the meeting. Joyce Lanning is formerly an assistant professor of the Graduate School of Public Health at UAB. She's an active member of the Citizens Climate Lobby /education. As an active member of that, she co-chaired the February 8th, 2020 community conversation, Faith Meets Business Climate Solutions for the Common Good. She has served on the Climate Change Task Force for the League of Women Voters US since 2009 and is now on the steering committee for the new LWVUS climate team. She continues to monitor the Alabama Public Service Commission for clean electricity decisions. Emily Northrop, and Emily can wave, also a PhD, is professor of economics emerita at Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. She is the Citizens Climate Lobby liaison to Representative Gary Palmer and is heading the effort to recruit 300 Alabamians to participate in the Citizens Climate Lobby monthly calling campaign. Emily's published letters to the editor in this May 18th AL.com op-ed, Climate Change and COVID-19, a promising contrast. She's also active with the Results and Friends Committee on National Legislation. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to our two speakers.
Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to be here. I think that first thing is that I've been a member of the League since about 2007. I was trained by Al Gore to do the climate change inconvenient truth slides, but we have had a climate emergency for quite some time. And this year, at the League of Women Voters 2020 convention, the League actually declared a very, very serious climate emergency. But that's not the first thing the League has done. Let's go to the next slide and see just what they said about the climate emergency. It called for an immediate, widespread mobilization by the United States. They want to restore, protect, and fund an ecologically sustainable environment and climate based on an interrelated approach that's environmentally sound, science-based, just, and equitable, and that's dedicated to adequately addressing the scale and speed of the global climate change emergency. Now, this didn't come out of whole cloth. This started back in 2006 when the convention said, we've got to do something about climate. So they created the League of Women Voters Climate Change Task Force. I think I actually joined on in 2008. These are some of the activities of the task force, in addition to creating a toolkit for climate action that was pretty interesting. We supported the maximum market cap and trade bill that passed the House, as you some may remember, in 2008, got nowhere in the Senate. We called for an aggressive emissions reduction targets. We supported EPA efforts to reduce the emissions from power plants, including the Clean Power Plan. And the ones that are highlighted are the ones that I participated in. I gave testimony in Atlanta about support for the Clean Power Plan on behalf of the League of Women Voters Climate Change Task Force. Let's go to the next one. And we'll see that a price on carbon resolution was adopted in 2014 because there's so many people, and you'll learn more about that from Professor Emily. But if you don't let the market fight climate change, then you have an uphill battle with regulations which have to be so carefully targeted. It has to be science-based. Pricing mechanisms vary between cap and trade and tax or fee and what you do with the revenues, but it's time to take action. And this resolution helped the League be more serious about just how to do that, since things had drifted away from the task force and the toolkit. So let's go ahead and look at the next thing. This recent climate emergency was all hands on deck. And I think they had over 300 or some odd people. Some of you who were at that convention might know. But if we keep on with business as usual, we will go over the cliff. And we don't want to do that because I, like you, probably want to pass on a livable world and live in one. So finally, let's go to the next slide. There was a merger of this task force that I was on and this carbon pricing task force that got started after 2014. And this new task force has just been operating about 4 or 5 months. It's a 24-person steering committee, and I'm on it. There are 10 teams. Anybody that's a League member can join one of these teams or form one of these teams. Carbon pricing is the one that has been in existence the longest, since about 2014, and it is the one we'll be talking about tonight. One more slide, I think. The convention revolution in 2018 is the one that really stood up for pricing carbon. The League of Women Voters, I'll read it, stands united with and in support of efforts to price carbon emissions, whether cap and trade, which is a trading force, got cats running in the background, or carbon tax or fee and other pricing mechanisms. We're for a price on carbon. We don't have a position on how the revenue generated is to be used. And Emily can talk more about that. We don't espouse any single method of pricing carbon over another, but this is an educational opportunity to learn about both. And the League decided to evaluate proposed methods based on their effectiveness and to abate emissions, and also some fact-based whether or not it can be implemented. You know, you want to spend your time and energy in a positive direction. So I think is that the last one, Emily? Okay. Yes. These are some resources that we'll send out to you in clickable form, because there's been a lot of work to background education on documents online, and there's information about how to join a team or form a team. And we'll be sending this in a form that you can click to get to some of that information if you should wish. Okay, over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Joyce. So in the next 40 to 45 minutes, I'm going to explain the case for carbon pricing and outline how you can help stabilize the climate. And I just love this artwork, so I wanted to find a way to get that included. So I'm going to begin just very quickly reinforcing climate science. And I always enjoy asking audiences, when did a lab scientist first measure the warming impact of CO2 and other greenhouse gases? And in 1859, John Tyndall measured that. And so about 10 years ago, we learned that Eunice Foote had done it 3 years earlier. She typically does not get the credit. But the point is, the basic science was demonstrated 165 years ago, and the basic science is neither new nor disputed. These greenhouse gases do cause warming. So CO2, carbon dioxide, is the principal greenhouse gas, and the unit for measuring CO2 in the atmosphere is parts per million, and that's what you see over here on the vertical axis. So if you have a million particles of air, how many of them are CO2 molecules? And over the last 800,000 years, that's what's measured on the horizontal axis. We've had fluctuations, natural fluctuations in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And corresponding with that have been natural cycles of warming and cooling of the Earth. By the way, our data source is to drill ice cores and from ice sheets, and they go down and pull up that ice core and then measure the content of air bubbles that were frozen up to 800,000 years ago. So what's not natural is this spike in CO2, and that is beginning with the Industrial Revolution caused by CO2 emissions from fossil fuels, from the burning of fossil fuels of coal, oil, and natural gas. And as the science explains, the Earth has warmed. The horizontal line in this picture is the average global temperature across the 20th century. So these blue years are 1880, when we first started keeping the data, up until the 1940s. The global temperature was below the 20th century average. And in recent years, the temperature has been above the 20th century average. So you see the clear trend of warming. 2020 is an interesting year due to COVID and the decline in economic activity. We've had a decline in global emissions of about 10%. So, but even though global emissions have gone down by about 10%, 2020 is expected to be tied with 2016 as the hottest year on record. So what this demonstrates is that the climate system has a whole lot of inertia built into it. We can't turn it on a dime. No matter what we do, we're gonna get more warming. The question is, are we gonna get some more warming or a lot more warming? 19 of the 20 warmest years have all occurred since 2001. And again, 2020 appears to have tied the hottest year of 2016. So in 2020, along with plenty of extreme flooding and drought and precipitation and sea level rise, we've also set some records. In addition to being the hottest year, the fires that began the year in Australia and then later in California were unprecedented. And we had a record-setting 30 named Atlantic storms. We also have climate change in Alabama. The average annual temperature. All right, can somebody mute that person for me, please? The average annual temperature is up about a degree and a half Fahrenheit since 1970. Between 2015 and 2050, Alabama was impacted by $25 billion weather and climate disasters. 8 of those alone were in 2020. The sea level at Dauphin Island is up about 6 inches since the mid-1960s. That is greater than the average sea level rise across the planet. Sea turtles and whooping cranes are endangered species that spend part of their time in Alabama. Going forward, expect more heat and extreme weather and sea level rise. Our crops and forests are going to become more vulnerable, and we're told to expect the spread of infectious diseases. With the extra heat and moisture, mosquitoes are going to have a longer season. And so something like the West Nile virus is going to be more common. We've got some good news, and I'm going to be sharing good news with you this evening. And one is that we have the solutions to draw down the atmospheric concentration of CO2. So we don't need to simply slow this growth in CO2 emissions. We need to draw it down. We need the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere to decline. And we already know how to do that. I recommend to you this book and website, Drawdown. It details 80 substantive existing solutions that will both reduce the amount of pollution we put into the atmosphere and pull some of that pollution out. There is no silver bullet. That's one of the lessons of this book. There's no one thing that's going to save us. It's going to be we need a comprehensive approach, but nothing new needs to be invented. So this pie chart shows the 80 solutions, and the size of the pie piece represents the potential under reasonable circumstances, reasonable assumptions, the contribution of each of these solutions to drawing down CO2 in the atmosphere. And we often think of, we need clean electricity, we need clean cars. That's all true, but it goes beyond that. The solutions include our food and agriculture, empowering females, buildings and cities, our land use practices, and our materials. So solutions that you can personally adopt. Number 3 in that pie chart, so it's a very significant solution, is to reduce food waste, and that's something that Americans can sure do. Another one also very high on the list with tremendous potential is to eat a plant-rich diet. I include this picture as sort of a promo for the Drawdown book. The artwork in it is really beautiful. Family planning is another very significant solution. And from a climate perspective, we've got too many people on the earth, especially Americans. So our US emissions on a per person basis, are well over 2 times more than the typical Chinese, and about 8.5 times more than the typical Indian. So family planning in the United States, maybe it's time to quit begging for grandbabies. Other solutions are familiar to you probably, and number 63 in their list is telepresence. So congratulations, we are doing it tonight. So reduce what you can, reduce the emissions that you can, and offset the rest. So offsets are a way to calculate your level of emissions. And one place you can do that is at this website, Climate Stewards. So calculate the level of emissions. For example, if you take a flight to go lobby in DC, you can find out how many emissions you're responsible for on that trip. And then purchase carbon offsets to fund projects that will compensate for your emissions. Some of those include planting trees or preserving forests. And as you know, trees sequester carbon, take carbon out of the atmosphere. One of my favorites is the fuel efficient cook stoves that reduce the amount of pollution going into the atmosphere from cooking. Climate stewards, when I first heard about offsets, I was a bit skeptical. How do I know it's really gonna do what they say they're doing? So Climate Stewards certifies all the projects that receive their support, and Climate Stewards is recommended by Catherine Hayhoe. And that's when I got on board with Climate Stewards. So this is where I do my offsets. She is climate scientist extraordinaire. And interestingly, also, she is an evangelical Christian. So, so she recommends Climate Stewards. So, but basic economics is we cannot rely on enough individuals and firms opting to cut enough of their pollution in time. So as an academic, I taught a whole bunch of basic economics, and this is just, and you might remember this lesson, those of you who also took introductory economics. Pollution is a textbook case of needing the government to get involved. So the good news, more good news, is we already have the policy solutions. The basic from the perspective of an economist, and in some audiences, people are pleased to be hearing from an economist. That's not always the case, but economists view the problem as people, firms, individuals. We get to pollute for free. We get to put our pollution into the atmosphere, use the atmosphere as a dump for free. And so the basic case for carbon pricing is to make polluters pay to pollute. If we have to pay to pollute, then we're going to figure out, we have the financial incentive to figure out how to pollute less. So a carbon price, or making polluters pay, establishes a clear financial incentive to phase out of fossil fuels, and it incentivizes innovation to achieve our pollution goals at the lowest possible cost. And economists like that efficiency. So there are alternative designs to price carbon, and the different types of carbon pricing can be combined together. I'm going to present just some very basic elements. And again, as Joyce mentioned, the League endorses carbon pricing, but does not endorse a specific plan for doing so. However, economists have a recommendation. And a couple of years ago, this 3,500 plus US economists, including 4 former Fed chairs, Nobel laureates, signed on to an economist statement on carbon dividends. And I'm going to have the elements of it here, and then the next slide will repeat those and I'll explain it further. So what the economist recommended in the statement that was published in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, is to endorse a gradually increasing carbon tax, with the revenue that the government collects going to US citizens via equal lump sum rebates. And the economists note that most people will benefit financially. This plan would replace the need for carbon regulation. Economists are not big on regulation because of the inefficiencies of those. The economists recommend a border adjustment to protect American competitiveness and to incentivize other nations to price carbon. I'll say more about that in a few slides. And the economists note that this promotes economic growth. So, here it is again. We know when coal, gas, oil are extracted from the earth, the chemists tell us when those fossil fuels are burned, how much CO2 will be emitted. And this carbon tax or carbon fee plan is for the fossil fuel companies to pay $15 per ton of CO2 that will be emitted when their products are burned. That's considered a low amount. The plan is for that $15 per ton to grow on a year-by-year basis to become a more powerful deterrent to burning fossil fuels. The money goes to the US Treasury, and here is where people have disagreements over what the Treasury should do with the money. The League has no position on this. The League doesn't even necessarily recommend a carbon tax, and it's sure the League, we don't also, neither do we recommend what the Treasury should do with the money. But some people say that the Treasury Department should take that money and buy set up mass transit. Other people say the government should build climate resistant infrastructure. Some people say it should go towards R&D, towards planting trees. So there's disagreement. Oh, some people say the money should be used to cut taxes, other types of taxes. So disagreement over what the Treasury should do when it receives the money. But this plan, the economist plan, is that the money should go right out the door to US households, and that some folks call that a dividend to the households. So why a dividend? Well, when these companies pay this fee, that means that they are going to pass some of that cost right along to their customers. So they're going to raise the price for the coal, gas, and oil that they sell. And so everything that needs fossil fuel for in its production, its transportation, either as an ingredient or as an energy source, everything that uses fossil fuel is going to become more expensive to households. So on the one hand, the cost of living is going to go up. On the other hand, the dividend is monthly money in the bank for households. For most Americans, especially for low-income Americans, the dividend exceeds the increase in cost of living. So in that way, this program increases the purchasing power of households. At the same time, it sets up the incentive to get off of fossil fuels. So a way that a company can avoid having to purchase more expensive electricity that comes from coal, oil, and natural gas is to put solar panels on. Households have the incentive to buy more fuel efficient cars. And there's the incentive also is to figure out how to produce what we produce, transport what we transport, using less and less and less fossil fuels, building the market for a clean economy. And as the market for the clean economy grows, those products, those processes become cheaper. So this particular bill was introduced in the Congress that just ended, and it was introduced in the Congress before that. We expect it to be introduced in the current Congress. It is effective at reducing emissions. It creates jobs. This transition to the clean economy is going to create a lot of clean jobs. It's good for people. For most Americans will experience an increase in their purchasing power, let alone cleaner air. It has been bipartisan. It's been introduced in both previous Congresses with bipartisan sponsorship. So the border adjustment that is recommended by the economist and is included in the act as it's been introduced. So this slide has a lot of words, but there's a real goodie at the end. So it'll be worth it. The border adjustment comes into play when we trade goods with countries that do not price their carbon. So let's say we have a price on carbon in the United States. India does not price its carbon. So the border adjustment comes into play. And the border adjustment will protect US competitiveness abroad. If US firms are having to pay this extra cost associated with the price on carbon, then they're going to have to charge higher prices for their goods. And that means when US firms sell their goods abroad, they're going to have to charge higher prices, and that makes them less price competitive with goods produced by Indian companies that don't have to price their carbon. So to protect the US competitiveness abroad, US exporters will receive a tax refund. So that means when they produce the good here, their cost includes the price on carbon, making them more expensive when they sell them. But when they sell those goods abroad, when the goods pass over the border, the US exporters will receive a tax refund, allowing them to be price competitive in other countries. Secondly, the border adjustment incentivizes other nations to price carbon. And I love this. This might be my favorite part of the plan. And this is how it incentivizes other nations to also price carbon. Imports from India will be taxed according to their carbon emissions, with money going to the US Treasury. So when India, a country that does not price carbon, sells their goods in the United States, they're going to have to pay the US Treasury the carbon price. They're going to have to pay the US Treasury according to how much carbon was included in their production process. Well, they're not going to like doing that. So how can they avoid paying the US Treasury money? India can price carbon. So the incentive is set up for India to price its own carbon so that Indian companies are not paying money to the US government. So beginning in 2023, the European Union is going to institute a border adjustment. So the US does not price carbon, the EU does, and they're gonna have a border adjustment. So that means that if we in the US are not pricing our carbon, then when we US firms sell goods in the EU, our firms are going to have to pay a tax to the EU. How can we avoid our firms paying a tax to the EU? The US can price carbon. So in this way, the EU's border adjustment will incentivize the US to price our own carbon. Yay. All right, a carbon tax will incentivize the adoption of these project drawdown solutions. So here are all the solutions that are represented in that pie chart. And a carbon tax will set up a financial incentive for all of the ones in green, bold, to be adopted. That's part of the process of decarbonizing our economy. All right, the second way, again, there's two main ways to price carbon. One is this carbon tax and fee that I've been talking about. The second is emissions trading, or cap and trade. So it's a different way to price carbon. And again, on this slide, I'm gonna have words. On the next slide, I'll have a picture and repeat the description. So the first step in a cap and trade system is that the government sets an overall limit on emissions. The government says, this is how many emissions we're gonna allow. And then the government issues permits to pollute, where the total amount of emissions allowed is equal to the cap. So a cap is set, and then if you want to pollute, you've got to get a hold of one of the permits that allows you to pollute. The trade part is polluters can buy and sell the permits. So this gives each polluter the financial incentive to pollute less, so that it can make money by selling its permits to another polluter. The cap can be lowered each year, allowing fewer and fewer total emissions. So, to repeat, and this is a very simplified version, we've just got two firms, just to explain how it works. So the government sets a cap, and this red circle represents the amount of pollution the red firm is allowed to pollute, and this blue represents the amount of pollution the blue firm is allowed to pollute. So that's the cap. And then what we see here is that the red firm pollutes, when it does its production, it pollutes less than it is allowed to pollute. So it can take this extra permit, it's an allowance to pollute that it doesn't need, and it can sell it. The blue firm is a dirty firm relative to the cap, and the blue firm pollutes this entire amount, so it is polluting more than its cap allows it to pollute. So the blue firm must acquire permits to pollute this extra amount. The trade part is that the blue firm buys the allowances or buys the permits from the red firm. With this cap and trade system, both firms have the financial incentive to innovate, change the way they produce, and get cleaner. The red firm wants to get cleaner because if it gets cleaner, it has more permits that it can sell. The blue firm wants to get cleaner so that it has to buy fewer permits. So the cap is set and the firms can buy and sell permits. And over time, the government can make the cap smaller and smaller so that we get cleaner and cleaner. The cap and trade system is more complicated than a carbon tax. Again, the league does not prefer one over the other. There are some league members that really like the cap and trade. That's their preference, but the league itself does not state a preference. But because it is more complicated, I think that's probably why the economist, the 3,500 plus economists, prefer the carbon tax, the simplicity of that approach. All right, so here is a global map of where carbon pricing initiatives have already been implemented or scheduled. 31 of these carbon pricing schemes are cap and trade or emissions trading systems. 30 of them are carbon taxes, and they cover 22% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So my point here is, this is not some radical far out thing. Carbon pricing is already implemented and being used. And notice that many places combine the two. They have both an emissions trading system, cap and trade, and carbon taxes. One such place is Britain. As part of the EU, and I need to go look this up again, the EU has a cap and trade system. In 2013, a carbon tax was also implemented in Britain, and the carbon tax is seen as key to their subsequent success in getting their electric utilities off of coal. Greenhouse gas emissions have fallen to their lowest level since 1890 in Britain. So evidence that a carbon tax works, evidence that cap and trade works. California has a cap and trade system, and it was launched in 2013. So here's 2013 to indicate the beginning of this cap and trade system. And you can see since 2013, the economy, GDP, the economy in California continued to rise. The population grew. The economy per person continued to rise because that's going up more steeply than population. So the economy looks good. Greenhouse gas emissions declined. Greenhouse gas emissions per person declined. Greenhouse gas emissions per dollar of the GDP declined. So this is good news coming from a cap and trade system in California. So turning to policy, 75% of voters want government to limit carbon emissions. So this is a poll, and I know these days we have to take every poll with a grain of salt, but here's one. And the question was, should the government take action to limit carbon emissions? Look within the yellow rectangle, and 75% in the United States said the government should take action to limit carbon emissions. Among the GOP, 55% said yes, government should take action. Swing voters, 80%, Democrats, 89%. This poll was by Frank Luntz, who is an important Republican pollster. So it doesn't have that sort of bias in the polling. From the Yale Climate Change Survey Program, the public opinion in 2020, they asked the question among adults in the US, should we require fossil fuel companies to pay a carbon tax? So they asked explicitly about a carbon tax, and adults in the US, 68% said yes. In Alabama, 63% said yes. In Alabama, Gary Palmer's district, 55% said yes. Now the good news there is it is more than half. So, so momentum is growing for carbon pricing. Students are young people are aware of climate change and are ready for us to move. The Students for Carbon Dividends is a group of 350 college and university leaders, and they wrote and signed their own statement on carbon dividends that support a tax and carbon dividends. In Alabama, student signatories included the University of Alabama chapter. This sounds like a libertarian group over in Tuscaloosa, the College Republican up at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and the student government presidents both in Tuscaloosa and at UAB. Young conservatives for carbon dividends assert capitalism isn't the problem, capitalism is the solution. They want a market solution, a financial incentive to get us off of fossil fuels, and believe that that financial incentive can be harnessed. I've already mentioned the thousands of US economists. The Business Roundtable endorses market-based carbon pricing. The US Commodities Futures Trading Commission wants effective, broadly applied carbon pricing. Major business CEOs, including 21 Fortune 500 companies, want Congress to price carbon. A coalition of 20 prominent faith organizations calls carbon pricing a powerful tool. And last but not least, the city councils of Birmingham and Florence have endorsed a carbon fee and dividend. These companies endorse the carbon dividend approach. Their website asserts that the dividend plan, where there's a tax and the proceeds go to households, would create 1.6 million jobs and drive $1.4 trillion in innovation. So important businesses are on board. Well, good news. Biden included climate among our nation's crises. It was one of his big four in his acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention, naming climate change as an existential threat to humans. His plan is to achieve 100% clean energy economy and reach net zero emissions no later than 2050. His plan includes executive orders, legislation, infrastructure, regional plans. Let's rely on the science, be a world leader, including climate change into our foreign policy, national security, and international trade policies. He wants to take action against fossil fuel companies and to leave no workers or communities behind. His cabinet officials support carbon pricing. John Kerry, who's going to be a special presidential envoy on climate issues, says one of the most significant ways that we can address climate change is through carbon pricing. Janet Yellen was a former chair of the Fed, and she's our incoming, assuming she is approved by the Senate, our incoming Secretary of the Treasury. She has said climate change is a serious problem demanding an immediate policy response, and a carbon tax offers the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary. Gina McCarthy, former EPA head, is going to be our climate czar, and she also speaks in favor speaks favorably of a carbon tax. As you know, from the climate perspective, it is wonderful news that the Democrats won the seats in Georgia, and the Senate will be split, and our vice president will have will break any ties. But as close as it is, climate legislation will have to be bipartisan. And as a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it in a moment, but we are just fiercely bipartisan, and because we want climate legislation passed. And I've just felt like when Congress gets around to finally doing it, this market-based approach that the League endorses also is going to be where they can find common ground. I think it's going to be where people can come together around it. So here's my ask of you. I ask that you sign up for and participate in the Citizen Climate Lobby's monthly calling campaign. We're hoping to get 300 Alabamians signed up and participating on a monthly basis with this calling campaign. And we're asking for 6 sentences from you each month. So it's quick and it's easy. And you can Google Citizens Climate Lobby Monthly Calling Campaign. I'm also going to send you afterwards a flyer with this link live on it. And what this does is once a month on the same day of the month, you will receive either an email or a text, depending on your preference, a call-in guide. And the call-in guide will include the telephone number of your member of Congress, and it will suggest a script. You can say whatever you want to say, but it will offer a script. And with just a couple of sentences, hello, my name is Emily Northrop. I live in District 6, and I'm very concerned about climate change. I'm calling to ask you to work with your colleagues across the aisle to enact bipartisan climate legislation to stabilize the climate. You can say whatever you want to say. Be nice, because we know that that's more effective. And just speak to climate. And there will be talking points that you can go exploring, but really, you in 10 minutes, you can call your House member and both your senators. So after you call your House member, you will report that you called, and a similar calling guide will come up with Senator Shelby's information. Repeat your 2 sentences, and then report your call to Shelby, and a final guide will come to for you with a number of Tuberville. So in less than 10 minutes a month, 6 sentences, you can help build the political will for bipartisan action on the climate. And I asked, and I was assured, you do not have to join the Citizens Climate Lobby to participate in the calling campaign, and you will not get other emails. You will just get your once a month call-in guide. And should you experience something different, I want to know, because I have been assured that we won't be hounding you any other way. So, Citizens Climate Lobby, we have 611 chapters around the globe, including in Birmingham, and nearly 200,000 grassroots supporters. Our core values are our focus on the carbon fee and dividend, optimism. I checked the webpage. Yes, we are still optimistic about democracy. We build relationships on shared values, integrity, including in the use of our data, volunteer driven, fiercely nonpartisan, because we want climate legislation passed, and we work to empower everyone. People ask me, is there hope? Hope is what we create when we work together. So just a quick review. You can reduce your emissions and purchase offsets. Please, please join the monthly calling campaign. Be one of those 300 calls that Senator Shelby gets every month. If you're interested, check out the Citizens Climate Lobby. Talk with others. And when you talk with others about climate, lead with solutions. We've been told that's the effective way. So talk with them about carbon pricing. We need to make climate a bridge issue. I welcome your help in me reaching other groups. I've spoken to Sunday school classes and political groups, civic organizations. I'd be delighted to talk with a group of your friends. So that's my contact information, and I thank you very much. Maybe we're taking questions.
I really appreciate my colleague, Emily Northrop. You can see why. So any questions?
Should I stop screen sharing?
Yes, I think that would be good.
Okay.
I would also like to put in an ask, and that is that you who are league members who are interested in climate or climate pricing, follow up on something I will be sending out, which is how to look into the climate team and how to become involved in one of the teams that's there or start one of your own. Now is the time to build bridges and come up with a market solution for only part of our climate solutions. So anyway, with that, yes, any questions? You can put them in the chat or raise your hand.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat box. One, I think, has already been answered. How to get copies of the presentation. I believe there's a plan to mail that out after this call. And then Michael Hansen of Gas says, why is the EICDA price per ton so low? It ought to be somewhere around 10 times higher than 15 per ton. And Michael, if you want to unmute as well to take part of the discussion. But Joyce or Emily, do you have an answer to Michael's question?
So I appreciate the question very, very much. And you're absolutely right. $15 per ton is not much. It won't wreck the economy. That's the point. And it's written into the law that it goes up by $10 per ton. And so what that does is everybody knows, so it's not going to shock the economy, but it grows enough that all the models show that it will have the desired effect. So, by having it in the law, it starts at 15, it grows to 25, the second year, 35, the next year, 45, the next year. That allows businesses and individuals to plan. So uncertainty is really the bane for firms. So this approach has that certainty built in.
And I would like to add that the league is interested in something that can be adopted. And this is not a league activity, but if people actually begin to get dividends, there will be more emphasis on supporting this plan and helping it grow. And I have seen analyses that think that it has a greater chance than getting adopted than some that start with a much more realistic, higher price. But you're right, Michael, that the beginning is just a beginning.
I think the plan that the economist proposed was to begin at $40 a ton, but then have a slower increase. So again, the modeling, to the extent that we can rely on the models, the models show that we will get to where we need to be. And by the way, the way that particular law was written, there are emissions benchmarks. And if the benchmarks over the years aren't met, then it's written into the law that the acceleration will be by a larger amount. It won't be just $10 a year, it'll be by a larger amount. So it's modeled out to get us the effective reductions that we need.
And I would like to admit that Emily didn't mention it, but she was one of those economists that signed that Wall Street Journal article.
It was fun.
Michael, did that address your question?
Indeed.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great.
Appreciate gas.
Pete Johnson. Yeah, great. Who will be on our panel next month. Pete Johnson has asked, when will we see carbon offset market for timber in Alabama?
I don't know. I do not know.
You know, there is such a thing in the Northwest, and it seems like the timber companies ought to be interested in that stream of revenue for themselves. Is there any movement in the Southeast for that?
I don't know. I have a vague recollection that one of the bills that we lobbied on recently included a market for that, but that, so I cannot speak with authority on that. Sorry.
I think that we can send you, Pete, something about one of the bills that did have an agricultural component. So growing something. We should have looked that up, but we can send that to you. But you've got an absolute perfect point, because if our land use is more forested, if we have more in the way of agriculture that does not degrade the land but protects it, we will be better off. That's a good point. We'll look into that.
I'm reading in the chat that it's the Growing Climate Solutions Act.
Thank you. I knew it was growing something.
That's from Reva. Thank you, Reva.
Yes.
I think we've covered all the questions in the chat. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like to unmute and ask?
Oh, Barbara has one about the Juliana lawsuit, and this is the
Oh.
one, the kids group. And I haven't followed how they are right now. They've had a few successes, but some failures. Emily, are you up to date on that, or is anybody in the group up to date on the kids group? It's important. Some of us here, I think, lobbied for that, which meant to hold the government responsible for protection of the climate that is necessary for the pursuit of happiness and the right to life, et cetera. So it is a very interesting bill. They approached some of us in Alabama to introduce it. They wanted some in every state. We're not able back when to put one in Alabama, but the Oregon bill, I think, the Oregon pursuit is still somewhat active. And that's another question we need to follow up on and get back to the group with. Thank you, Barbara.
This is Nancy Sales. And if it's not relevant, you can tell me, but
You muted
that
yourself.
Oh, she might be
Nancy, we
frozen.
lost you for just a second. Might be frozen.
Yeah.
shall I try again? Or if there's somebody else, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
now we can.
We can now.
Good, thank you. That I understand, Emily, that you probably, or for certain, live in Gary Palmer's district, Alabama Congressional District 6. But how did it happen that you would be a liaison to that? Was it your approach, the Citizens Climate Lobby approach?
Thank you.
Palmer's?
So
Question
the CCL aims to have a member liaison to every member of Congress. And so I asked for Gary Palmer, and the wonderful surprise was in the previous Congress, there was a House Select Committee on Climate Change. And Gary Palmer was on that committee. And so when we had our CCL lobby meeting with his staffer last November, the staffer that we talked to had been Palmer's staffer to the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. That's the name of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. So that staffer had wonderful questions about carbon taxes. And it was such a substantive conversation. And but that's how Joyce was the liaison to Senator Shelby.
No, I was liaison for Gary Palmer, but when he ran for Congress again, I supported someone else. And so that was really inappropriate for me to be his liaison. And so I got to be Doug Jones's liaison. Right. And that was truly a gift and a very interesting thing but no matter whether somebody thinks the way we do or not, or is on the R or the D spectrum or the I or whatever, that our role is to go with a genuine appreciation for something. And if you can't do that, don't go till you can. So I was able to go to Gary Palmer with appreciations for things that he has done, and of course to Doug Jones. So it's an interesting opportunity to be part of democracy in action by being part of this education first, and then going and trying to influence the adoption of a bill that would help with our carbon heating.
This is a great opportunity right now, this year still. If you want to be in a lobby meeting, sign up for the CCL. You have to do a little bit of training, but ordinarily you have to go to DC to lobby these congressional offices, but we're doing it on Zoom. So go to the Citizens Climate Lobby, sign up, and take an hour's worth of training about our lobby approach. And I imagine you could find yourself on a team lobbying congressional offices.
And don't forget,
Thanks.
the League of Women Voters has many opportunities for you to get connected with climate solutions. Somebody else was speaking up.
Yeah, this is Dana. I was commenting that Reva had mentioned that we have reps, and we do. We're honored to not have reps from GAS, from the Sierra Club, GCCC. I apologize. That's my ignorance. And she's asking anything we can do as a group. In some ways, that's a segue a little bit to next month's League's meeting. Joyce, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, I see Stephen Stetson here, and Stephen is going to be one of the speakers about the impacts that we are facing and solutions with climate in Alabama. And we can learn more about Stephen, but he's with the Sierra Club. And Michael Hansen, I think we've asked Nina to, Nina Morgan, who is an outreach coordinator for GAS, working with the people that are most definitely affected by some of the disproportionate impacts of climate issues. And then Cindy Lowry, who is head of Alabama Rivers Alliance, because water is life. We can live without electricity even. I don't want to, but we can't live without water. And water is perhaps the newest resource that there will be struggles over. So each of these people have some deep knowledge about what's going on in Alabama that we can get involved with, and that that looks at some of the solutions. And I'm very appreciative. There's so many more groups that would be capable of sharing with us, but we thought a panel for 3 was about a good number, because we only have an hour, and in fact we're getting a little bit over our hour, so I don't want to push the envelope. But yes, this is an all hands on deck. This is a climate emergency, and all hands on deck is a good way of talking about it. And that means every organization, no matter what our particular angle is, have ways to hold hands and to support each other in this endeavor. Because I've told my young friends, this is a marathon, not a relay race, and I'm going to carry my baton as long as I can. But I'm glad to see young people, and I think I see some young faces that are coming along to pass on our baton. We're going to do as much as we can. All of us are, or we wouldn't be on this call. But it's a great opportunity, and I'm just so glad that Emily Northrop left Texas and came to Birmingham. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks.
And if there are any more questions, we can take them. But we might need to go on about our business. I don't know. It's up to you, Dana.
Well, I was going to say, go ahead.
I did put my email address in the chat. I really would appreciate the opportunity to speak again to a group of your friends, or any group of any size. So and I can tailor it, more to your specific interest. So thanks.
Great. Michael has noted in the chat box, that if anyone in Birmingham is interested in learning about our Birmingham Green New Deal effort, and his email address is there. It's michael@gasgroup.org. And Reva had put the initials I didn't recognize, or stand for Gulf Coast Creation Care, a newly formed group down in the Gulf. Thank you both very, very much for tonight. And again, I look forward to continuing this discussion next month at our Birmingham meeting. And again, it's February 11th at 6 o'clock. We're going to be graced with Stephen Stetson, with Cindy Lowry from Alabama Rivers Alliance, and with Nina Morgan from GAS, where we'll also be given other ideas about how to help.
And I also would like to ask everybody, each of you has a network of organizations that you're engaged with, and we need to learn from each other. So if you will send those to either Emily or me, or to Jean. Jean Johnson is our guru on communications or website. We can, and point us to other aggregations of groups, so that we can really encourage and reinforce each other's work, because it's all important, and all hands on deck.
All right, everyone, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in February. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.